France with Vice President Harris late last year, and so I can say that I'm no stranger to the hospitality of the French people, and I'm very excited to be here tonight with you in conversation. For the folks who are watching on the Twitters and Facebook, thank you for joining us. We are going to have a conversation tonight, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. We are en masse because we have been tested. We are negative. Everyone here has been tested. We have adhered to COVID protocols, and I'm just so excited. Chimamanda and I had an opportunity to connect prior to coming out here, and I did say, Mr. Ambassador, I said, do they know that what they have gotten themselves into having this conversation with the two of us during Black History Month, nonetheless. So with that, let's just get into it. Welcome.
Thank you, Simone. And I'm just really happy to be doing this with you. I want to start by saying that I've always felt that she's an absolute star. And watching her on television has always, for me, meant something, because I think that the way that she occupies space in the world, and her red lipstick, and her hair, since this is Black History Month, let's start with that, are really important. And we should talk about hair, right?
We should talk about hair, yes.
Just watching you, I would often think, I'm so glad that this woman exists and is visible.
Thank you. I'm glad you exist. We discussed this a little bit when we chatted earlier, but I feel like I see myself a lot in what you have written and what you have said, from your words on feminism to your interviews, and we talk about hair, and you did an interview with the Baltimore Sun a little while ago. It was a profile of you, and in the profile you told a story, and that you have a daughter, a beautiful, beautiful baby girl, not so much a baby anymore though. She's 6 years old. Shout out to all the parents with 6 years old in the room and on the Zooms. And that your sister said, oh my goodness, I need to send you some metal combs so you can corral her hair. Would you like me to do that? I'm paraphrasing, but you told her no. And I found that so powerful, and you said that basically this is what your daughter's hair looks like, and you're not going to conform to what people believe it should look like. And I see myself in that so much. I look like this intentionally. I'm not light-skinned, skinny with long hair. I'm a bald, curvy black woman with bedazzled nails. Let's talk about this. People talk about the idea of identity, but what we're talking about is being your authentic self. And you have a lot of philosophies, so tonight we're going to get into Chimamanda's philosophies. And one of your philosophies is about, I would argue, authenticity. You write about it, you live it, okay? Fabulous authenticity. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, first about my daughter. She's 6 and perfect. She's a fierce little thing, and I'm terrified of her. But I think this is a good thing. And for a long time, and even now, and also I think for us as Nigerians, there's a kind of, I think there's a kind of immigrant anxiety about, and I think also I'm going to say there's also a kind of black anxiety about looking perfect. The hair has to be perfect because if you're black and you're a bit, your hair looks a bit rough, you're going to be judged in a way that's very different from if you're white and your hair looks a bit rough. So,
yeah, the messy bun hits different when you are melanated.
But I also just felt that because when I was growing up, I had so much, I had a lot of hair, and I just had the most horrible time having my hair done. And I have not forgotten just the pain of it. And so I said my daughter is not going to go through that. So from the time she was really young, actually I didn't comb her hair until she was maybe 4. Yeah, I would finger detangle. And whatever that did, we were happy with. Right? I didn't need it to be perfectly done. And so, and my mother died recently, but my mother had very firm ideas about how hair should be. So she'd be like, don't you need to do something about her hair? And I'd say, I've already done something about it. That's it. And she's 6, and I think now she will not have the memories that I have of hair being associated with pain, and also trying to force your hair to do something that God did not intend for it to do. I just don't see the point. But I think in a larger sense, I just think that life is so short. And we're here so briefly and so fleetingly that I don't see the point in not being who we really are. Because if we're here for such a short time, we might as well just be who we are. And when I talk to particularly young women, I like to say to them, and I say this because obviously I think men also have, at least men have issues, I guess. But no.
We'll get to you in a second, fellas. We'll get to you in a second. We have something for you here.
Maybe. But when I say, because I think that young women, there's a lot of pressure. And this pressure to conform, this pressure to be likable, this pressure to, and I say to them, you know what, somebody will like you the way you are. And if you're going to be a self that's not true to you, so that people like you, they don't actually like you. They just like this invented persona. And for me personally, I just always felt the most at peace when I'm me. And I'm very willing to, I like to be liked.
Don't we all? Yeah. I mean, it's a natural feeling. Everybody wants to be
liked. It's human, that desire. But what is not human, and I think what is socially constructed, is this idea that we need to be liked. And I think women are taught that. And I did not get that memo. So I do not need to be liked. And I think that there's a difference there, because if you free yourself from that need to be liked, then you can be who you are. And the people who like you will like you for the real person that you are.
I agree. I think the question is, I think the question is how, right? Because people say, oh, okay, you tell people let's be our authentic selves, but how does someone who, isn't as comfortable with themselves as you or myself are, we don't care. Yeah. We care, but we don't. Care. We care, but we don't care.
Yeah.
We're comfortable with not caring. But what about the people? How does someone free themselves from that idea and that thought? Young women especially, but I also think it applies to people in general.
Yeah. I wish I knew I would sell it.
Worth $1 billion, okay?
But I think maybe it's what is the thing that is least exhausting. But I should also say, obviously, it's easy to say, right? And I think it's a journey. I think it's something that one does. It's a practice, I think. So I know, for example, that there are times when I have to talk to myself and say to myself, no, right? You're kind of thinking you should do that because it's considered more mainstream or more, but no, because you're not going to sleep well at night and you're going to wake up and you're not going to like yourself, so no. So I think it's a constant, it's a practice. And in general, I would say to young women, what is the thing that makes you not feel exhausted? Because performing is exhausting. Right? And there's something quite freeing, I think, when you get to that point where, and it's not that you don't care, because I often don't, I think it can be too glib to say, oh, I don't care. Like you said, we care, I care. I like being liked. But I think, again, it's that distinction. If you say to yourself, it's lovely to be liked, I would like to be liked. But if I need to change myself to be liked, then they don't really like me. And I think it's a practice. And I think also, I would say to young women, get off social media a bit.
Let's talk about social media.
Because
okay.
And I say that because all of these studies that show what it does to teenage girls, how the more time they spend on Instagram, I think in particular Instagram.
You can get particular,
yes.
It's the truth. Did y'all read the study? They're laughing like It is the truth. There is a study, and the study particularly signaled out Instagram and the detrimental effects it has on young women, young girls across the board, teenagers who spend time on that platform. And I mean, we can take this conversation and get into the details about suicides, particularly over the last 2 years, not just as it relates to the pandemic, but everyone who as a society, we've been more online, and our young people have been more online. So we get though, but
it's true.
Instagram is a problem.
So I would say, and I wouldn't say, I don't want to sound like sort of that old cantankerous uncle that says everything modern is terrible, even though it sounds like that. But I would say just step back a bit, right? So I was talking to some women in Nigeria. I just came back from Lagos, and I said to them, if you do 5 hours every day, just try and do 2. And let's see how that goes. And the 3 hours left, read a damn book. Like a proper book. Because people don't read. But I won't go into a rant about that.
especially the conversation around social media. You talk about, you just came back from Lagos, you know, Twitter actually was banned in Nigeria until recently. They banned Twitter, they banned the use of Twitter. For folks that don't know, why did that happen? Or what is your philosophy or thought about why Twitter was banned?
Twitter was banned because we have a government that is inept. That's why. That's the short answer. The long answer is we don't have enough time.
We don't have enough time.
But it was banned by the government. But I should say that while I think that social media is bad for young women, in general, young people actually, I think, when it comes to political issues in parts of the world that don't necessarily have real thriving democracies like Nigeria, I think Twitter is a good thing because I think it gives young people a voice. And so the fact that the government felt so threatened by Twitter to ban it, I thought was a good sign. Because young people are organizing on Twitter, because recently we had this EndSARS sort of movement, really is what it is, of young people, and it was organized online, it was Twitter. So it's kind of that thing where it's not that Twitter is all bad and all terrible, it has its uses.
It has its uses. Young people are organizing across, I mean, they're organizing in Nigeria, they're organizing here in the States, and you have written, honestly, you've written a little bit of everything, okay? We've written on, we'll talk about it a little bit, but you've written about grief, you've written about feminism, you've written about race, you've written about race in the context of identity, you've written about young Nigerian women, young Nigerian people, you've written about engaging in various cultures, you've also written about democracy though. You've written about it all. So let's talk about your philosophy, if you will, on democracy. And especially in a time where here in the United States, and I would also argue globally, right? The Biden-Harris administration, they recently had at the end of last year, a summit on democracy. And countries and heads of states all around the world participated. President Macron participated. President Buhari from Nigeria, he participated in Summit on Democracy. And the point is that, as I have heard President Biden say on a number of occasions, that democracy, we're at a point where folks have to prove if democracies can work, because democracies around the world are being questioned. And here in the United States of America, you hear almost regularly on television now, it's popping up in writings almost regularly about the threat to democracy. And I wonder if you feel that there is a real threat to democracy here in the United States and around the world.
Yes. But I should say that I felt it more strongly with the former American president.
Yes, 45.
Yes, that person. For reasons that I think are fairly obvious. I mean, and just reading recently about, this idea of sort of inventing stories to justify wanting to carry out a coup.
For folks at home and in the room that don't know what my good friend here is speaking about, there were reports from the Washington Post that said the former president and his administration and people who are aligned with the former president's administration essentially wanted to justify something they called a sweep, which my colleague Ari Melber called a coup.
That's what it is. We should use the right language. Yeah. Because one of the problems I think with this country, and I love America, is there's often a tentative sort of an unwillingness to call things what they are. When the former president first became president and was lying, I remember there was so much discourse around, should you call it a lie?
Yes, I lived that discourse. It was crazy!
And I thought, yes, it's a lie. You call it a lie when it's a lie. It doesn't depend on who's doing the lying. It depends on whether it's a lie or not. And I think what's happening again around this discourse about the elections, I feel as though there isn't I was going to go to a rant about the failures of the left, but yeah, I feel like there isn't enough force of pushing back and creating a counter-narrative, which actually is the truth. So yes, I think it's a coup. There is no evidence of any kind of voter fraud or any kind of, just basic sort of kindergarten level understanding of things. like, oh look, we were watching it, and initially the Republicans were up, and then suddenly they weren't. Yes, that's because all the votes hadn't been counted.
Yes, the facts. These are the facts.
Yeah, they're just elementary level understanding. And so anyway, yes, back to your question, just so I don't get derailed into a rant. But yes, I think democracy, I mean, obviously, just looking at Europe, but also in the US. So I think thinking about countries like Hungary, or even Poland, I'm just like, what is going on? And I'm a little obsessed with the Second World War, so I read a lot about that period.
Are we going to see you writing about that again anytime soon? Are we going to see a book about democracy, something anchored in democracy?
No.
Way to dash the dream.
Just writing a nice love story. No, I'm kidding. But everything is about, but think about it though, I think everything in the end is political, so...
Yes,
so
yes. Say that
argue,
again, because I don't want anybody to miss that, because it is inherently true.
It's true, it's true.
Everything is political.
So, so my novel Americana, for example, which, you know, in many ways is an immigrant story, it's a love story, but also it's very political, and in ways that are both overt and not. So, you know, obviously in the book I read about Obama, there's a scene at you know, the evening when Obama won, but also just in a larger sense, it's political, everything is political. In this country, obviously, because I'm politically left-leaning, I was very relieved when the former president was not re-elected. It seems to me that grown-ups are now in charge in this country, and so it gives me a bit of hope. But I think that just watching American politics, if people who have been voted into power can say that attacking the seat of government is legitimate political discourse, that's very undemocratic. So that, if anything, is proof that something is really wrong in this country. And I kind of feel like we need a revolution. People who are reasonable and who believe in science, and who are willing to have conversations with the other side, you know, the reasonable other side, need to rise up, because yes, democracy is in peril in this country, in many parts of the world. Let's not even go into Nigeria, because I would not even call it a democracy, what we have. And I say that not to
That's a strong statement.
No, but it's true. It's true. You cannot have a democracy where, you know, you have a government that routinely ignores court orders. I mean, the fundamental basis of democracy is that there should be rule of law. I mean, we should all collectively agree that if a court says, for example, you cannot arrest this man, you need to let him go, you do that. We have a president who just shrugs. It's like, nope, not doing it. Journalists are arrested. You know, so yes, it's not, I'm not saying it to be flippant, I'm saying it because I believe it. It's not, we do not have a real democracy, no.
So obviously there's this conversation happening globally. This is a global challenge that many countries are dealing with. And again, President Biden has talked about it a lot. You know, people are wondering, not even wondering, saying that democracies are dead, that they can't work anymore. And the fundamental question, some people would argue of democracy and in getting people to trust the government again is, can governments work for the people? Can they make a difference in the people's lives? And elections are a key part of that. Can you carry out free and fair elections? I know there's elections in Nigeria in 2023, so we'll be watching. And I think the world will be watching, and that is a topic of conversation. Okay,
but we should also say, I mean, and yes, I think President Biden's question is valid, but I think also we cannot separate that from how much money. I mean, I think the problem with the politics in this country is that it is so intertwined and infused with money.
Oh yeah. The entire apparatus, Democrats, Republicans, it is, I used to work for a lot of people. I used to work for Senator Bernie Sanders. When he first ran for president, I was his press secretary, and Bernie Sanders' belief boils down to, and in that campaign it boiled down to, that we lived in a rigged democracy kept in place by a system of corrupt campaign finance. So because we live in a rigged democracy, we need to do this, kept in place by a system of corrupt campaign finance. We have to do this on racial justice. We have to do this on the economy. We have to do this on voting. We have to do this on, go down the line. And I think there are a lot of people in the country that do feel that way.
Yeah.
They feel like and live the real experience of the gross inequality that we're just experiencing daily.
And if you're a young, bright person who wants to, and I think that America is full of young, bright people who would do very well in political office, but how to get in, and then it just becomes about fundraising. And I remember I've read a few sort of memoirs and things about people who've been, and I just think, my God, the amount of time spent on phone calls, pretty much begging people for money is kind of disgusting. So what, I mean, I have some suggestions. So what is sort of, all right, let's move on.
No, I love it. I mean, this finds its way though into Americana. It does, like the idea of gross inequality. There's a scene in the book where I feel like they're in Nigeria, they're in Lagos, and young people, young poppin' black Nigerians, okay, going to a party, and you can tell the folks who are just very well dressed, and they've got the logos and everything on, but Nigeria is a country, much like other countries, who are experiencing gross inequality. And I think this is just another way that issues of democracy and politics find its way into your writing. And philosophy was there on the pages.
Yeah. And it's so funny because, just you talking about democracies made me think about how, what you said about trust and can it work for people. I think it can. I don't think democracy is a perfect system. It's the best we have, I think. It can work for people, but I think in many ways it's not. So maybe that's also why where we are. Because, we can sit here and bemoan the former president, but he had many supporters, still has many supporters, for ideas that I think are close to, I don't want to use that word fascist, it's overdone in this country, because people really need to go see what real fascism was. But that's actually undemocratic, right? And so you look at countries like Poland and Hungary, and even France has a thriving, undemocratic side.
The ambassador about to pull the plug on this thing.
But I think for me the question we should be asking is why, what's the basis for the support? So clearly, maybe there are ways in which democracy is failing us. Maybe in this country, the way that politics works and lobbying and how it's just so much about money and how, I think America is a good country that could be so much better. And people do not have to worry about going to see a doctor in a country like America because they don't have health insurance. Right? People, health insurance should not be tied to employment in this country, I don't think. Funding for schools should not be tied to property taxes. I think it's terrible, right? So you have.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about is constantly striving for a more perfect union. So that's where you get things like the Affordable Care Act and so on and so forth for people who do not have employment but are able to, and even if you do have employment, you can sign up in the exchange. But I think you're making a very, we could have this particular conversation all day long, I can. Okay, I want to pull up something before we take some crowd questions. I have some other, because I want to talk about cancel culture, but before we get there, okay, you said, and you're like, where did I say this? Don't worry, I'll tell you. In an interview, and you talked about, and I'm looking for the actual, here we go. You talked about ideological purity. And you have said previously that ideological purity is dangerous, and it is becoming the lens through which many approach storytelling in America. Somebody said, yes, indeed. Talk to us about that. Talk to us about ideological purity. And let me say off the bat that I agree with you. I think ideological purity is dangerous, and I think it's kind of crazy. And I use the example of people talk a lot about, and you used this in your quote. You said, people say Trumpism is not us, and you can't really unpack what is happening if you are not willing to see, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically see folks who subscribe to Trumpism, for example, and we can insert any other different word for Trumpism, as full people. And I think that is so profound. I have people in my family very close to me who voted for the former president. And people are like, well, you? Yes, me. And they're like, so the idea that everyone who supports X is, for, in a very simplistic term, as I have heard some people describe, not smart or not politically tuned in or white or racist is wrong. The idea that everyone who self-describes as a feminist is, as I've heard you say before, a bra-burning, no makeup wearing, like fashion-hating, lady is not true. It's crazy. So talk to us. Let's unpack the idea of ideological purity.
And God bless you too. I mean, I just cannot imagine what it's like to do what you do. But anyway.
It was stressful.
No, it is, because I think, and I not to sound, but I hope this doesn't come across as sort of being condescending, but I do think that there's something about the level of political discourse in this country that has really gone down. And so I came here when I first came to the US when I was 19. I came to go to college. And I've always been interested in politics, so I would sort of follow things. And I feel as though in that time, I'm now 44, I feel as though the discourse has really gone down. And part of it, I think, is this idea of ideological purity. It seems to me that there isn't nuance, there isn't even reality. So, Simone, you're a Democrat, but yesterday you had dinner with a Republican, therefore you're bad. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but fundamentally it kind of is that. So you voted for something that supported climate change, but you didn't vote for something that supported,
Women's rights.
Women's rights. Therefore, we cannot talk to you. And also the moralizing of discourse. You know, so it's not so much I don't agree with the position you've taken, it's that you're bad. Like you're a bad person. And I just think it's very unrealistic. Human beings are not perfect. And I think because I come from a storytelling perspective, and because I really believe in literature, I really believe in reading human stories, I really believe in humans as, you know, we're very complex and complicated. I'm not ideologically pure. There are times when I have made choices that did not necessarily align with the things I believe ideologically, because I'm human and I'm messed up in the way that human beings are. And I think if we took a much more realistic approach to politics, maybe we would get things done more, maybe. But I don't even know whether it's too late, because I sort of feel like now in America, if somebody on the right says that glass of water is half full, the person on the left then feels compelled to say it's empty. And by the way, neither is true. But it's about this sort of, the narratives have to compete because I don't know, there's just this.
So we need more nuance in storytelling in America, you believe?
In everything. I don't mean just literature, I mean in political life, because we need to start off with the assumption that there is no such thing as ideological purity. It doesn't make sense, right? It just doesn't. And I feel like that's what my 6-year-old should be doing, not adults, you know?
I agree. So, but this then, okay, no ideological purity, we're on the same page there. And I think a lot of people, even though they subscribe, and I use the term traffic in ideological purity, once it being unpacked and I think really having a conversation about it, I think a lot of folks actually would agree with you. But let's talk about cancel culture, because I feel like the conversation about ideological purity and cancel culture are in the same bucket. They're swimming in the same stream, okay, as my grandmother would say. And I'm just talking about myself personally. I struggle with the idea of people saying, oh, we shouldn't cancel people. Because on one hand, I agree, because I just said there's no such thing, I agree with you about ideological purity. But on another hand, should there not be consequences for the positions and the stances and the beliefs that people have and that they articulate?
Yeah. So I don't think I think there's a middle ground in a way.
Some nuance?
So,
there we say, nuance.
So obviously I think that there should be consequences to things, but I think maybe the question is, and I don't even like that expression cancel culture, because
I know you've said it, you've did an interview. She's got a lot of interviews.
Maybe time to stop, but I think that it's just been co-opted by sort of Fox News, and it's become this thing that, again, lacks nuance. You know, people just say cancel culture, but I do think that it refers to something real that is happening, which is, and it's kind of all connected to ideological purity. It's that idea that we cannot, that the assumption of good faith is dead. So if you said something to me now, the general idea is that I should take the most sort of negative interpretation of what you've said. I think what that leads to is a kind of, so people should face consequences, but there should be a sense of, there should be a sense of proportion. So for me, it's a question of, so I'll tell you a story. I remember somebody saying to me once that she was very disappointed. And even that is just the most annoying thing. When you're told, people tell you they're disappointed in you for liking what you like. It is such nonsense. But anyway, so this woman had said to me that she was disappointed in me because I had written about liking Philip Roth's novels. Now, Philip Roth, I think, and maintain, was a great novelist. He was also, I think, a lot of his work was misogynistic. He just did not know how to create female characters that were people. They were types. And so this person said, how can you be feminist and like his work? And I thought, well, I do. Because A, I recognize the misogyny, and I don't like it, obviously. But I also recognize that the world is full of misogynists. And we can't wish that away. So he wrote about that. And also for me, so I like Philip Roth, but there's certain writers I do not like. They're writers that I think are racist. I will not buy their books, I will not read them. I mean, I've read them to know that they're racist, I won't read anything else. I won't write about them. So I draw my line somewhere. And when I say racist, I mean really racist. I don't mean that there's a character in the book that maybe says the N-word, because I think we need to look at things in a holistic sense. There are books in which a character can say the N-word, but you know that the worldview of that book is not racist. And there are books in which you read, and it might not be the N-word at all, but you know that that book is racist, because the worldview of it is racist. So I think maybe for me it's a question of both proportion and a kind of, we have to approach these things with thoughtfulness. You can destroy people. You really can't destroy people in this sort of, face consequences. Then the next thing you know, they're putting up people's addresses online, and there are real consequences to it, I think. You don't know who's going to go into major depression. You don't know whose child is going to be negatively affected for life. So I just think that I think it's that thing between the Philip Roth novel and the racist novel. Like there should be proportion.
There should be some nuance.
There should be some nuance, and I just worry that there isn't really. Not much, not anymore. And social media contributes to it because Twitter is about how extreme can you get, how clever and how quick. And so it's not a forum that lends itself to nuance. And so usually what it means then, everybody's kind of performing. We're all in many ways performers.
Every day, we're performing on this stage.
No, there's a sense
but
which
an authentic performance.
I like to think so. So these are views that I would repeat if I were in my pajamas at home. I really believe that. But I think there's a sense in which Twitter is about, you're kind of performing, and I think that there are consequences to that. You're writing about people who are real human beings, and it just, I don't know. I just think that it's not so much that I'm saying people shouldn't be held accountable, because they should be. But I think maybe it's how are we doing the holding?
That's a gem, okay? So for the people at home and in the audience, we just heard a gem. We are going to have some Q&A from the audience, so I want folks to get their questions ready. As you're getting your questions ready, I would like to remind you we're doing questions, not comments or soliloquies, okay? So have your question ready, and we will answer your question. And while we're finding people, think very long and hard about those. I would be remiss if I did not ask you. I want to ask you two questions, but I'll save one for the very, very end after the questions. But I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the ordeal, an epidemic, I would call it, of banning books in the United States of America currently, particularly books written about Black people, particularly books written about the very real history in our country. And I just think the world would love your view on that.
Right, so here's my view on it is there's something that often one hears from the political right in this country, which is facts don't care about your feelings. I think this is where that applies. No, honestly, I think this is what it's the facts. I quite frankly think that African American history, and I'm being specific when I say that because there's Black, which is I'm Black, I'm not African American, you're Black, you're African American.
Facts.
Right? And I think that African American history is actually terribly underknown, undertaught, simplified, overly simplified, in ways that I think are dangerous. So, and I'll say, and what I mean by that is, so this is Black History Month, and I feel conflicted about that because I think every month should be Black History Month. But at the same time, I kind of understand that this is something that was done because of all, the centuries of sort of neglect and silencing of Black stories. But the reason that I worry about it is that it kind of becomes this month about Martin Luther King. And I think he obviously was wonderful, but there's so much more. There's so much more. And I sometimes feel that if we actually taught the story of African Americans in this country, then there's so much about contemporary discourse that would be better. So the subject of reparations, for example. So I am completely, I think that reparations should be mainstream and should not be in any way a niche subject. And by the way, when I say that, I mean reparations for African Americans. I don't mean me. I came from Nigeria. And by that, so my point is, there is a history in this country in which people who were enslaved and the people who they gave birth to and the people those people gave birth to, we inherit trauma. Human beings inherit trauma. So not just the psychological trauma, but you have a country. Honestly, when I started reading about African American history, I just thought, my God. So I live in Maryland.
It's traumatic. It's traumatic.
That's my American home. 20 years ago, they were draining swimming pools in Maryland so that Black families would not swim. I'm not talking about 1940. Right? So there's, anyway, so we know about redlining, we know about, so I feel as though facts don't care about your feelings. Every American should know the facts of what happened, and it should be familiar, and it should go beyond Martin Luther King. I remember when I first read, this is before the movie The Green Book came out, so I'd read about it, and I was talking to a friend of mine who's African American, and I assumed she knew, so I was like, oh my goodness, even just this idea of the Green Book. She's like, what's that?
It's not a mainstream. Do folks know what the Green Book is?
She has a master's degree. And it's not, so that my point is, it's not a failure on her part. It's a failure on an education system that diminishes, simplifies, flattens the African American story. Because to do that, and this, by the way, I'm reading this book by, I'm going to blank on his name. He's a professor at NYU. But this is his idea, where he says that this kind of simplifying and almost not erasing, but sort of minimizing the reality of African American history is because to do that, it's almost as though you have to do that, otherwise you challenge the larger narrative of America. Right? If you tell the full story, then you challenge this sort of, very rosy.
Oh yeah.
Story
You
of
tell
America.
people the Civil War is about slavery, and there might be an uprising in a classroom somewhere in America, even though it was. It was about the economy as well, the economic engine that was slavery, and people took up arms against this government because they believed they had the right to own people that looked like us.
So when they say it's about states' rights, yes, but states' rights to do what? And the thing is, I think, again, facts don't care about your feelings. We should teach people the facts. And this kind of book banning and this kind of trumped up hysteria about something called CRT that nobody knows what the bloody hell it is anyway. It's just, I think, again, proof that this is a country that hasn't reckoned with its history and with its present in terms of its relationships with its Black people. That's what I think about this country, right? I think that there's still so much that hasn't been done. And every day, we can sit on a stage like this and say, we need to have conversations about race. And I guess we do, but really what we need to do is, I'm interested in what's the curriculum of high schools and middle schools? What's being taught, right? And can we make it maybe a bit more narrative? There's a lovely line that I like to repeat from Robert Lowell's poem where, why not just say what happened? Like, I want, to kids, kids should, every educated adult in this country should be very familiar, not just with slavery and plantations of Martin Luther King, but redlining and also just sort of having...
And Carter G. Woodson, who created Black History Month, well, Negro History Week, which turned into Black History Month, but I digress, but very important. What you're saying is there's nuance, again, this philosophy, if you will, and is not currently there in this discourse.
And it's affecting what's happening today. That's the reason it bothers. I mean, obviously, I think history is good for its own sake, but we should also talk about how the present is about the past.
Do you think any one of your books will ever make it to this polarized place where they want to ban it from the schools? I feel like if I was a writer, that I wrote a book, but I don't consider myself a writer, but if I was a writer and I wrote about real stories, the question I would ask myself before I wrote my next book is, will they want to ban this? Because if so, this is the New York Times bestseller. Okay, we're going to take some questions from the audience. Where are my people? Okay, so we have Simon and Victor here, and we're going to take our first question right over here. And Victor is going to hold the microphone, yeah?
It's an honor to ask this question. Thank you so much for your comments. I was a little bit challenged by your statement about, of course we live in a very polarized and radicalized society. And of course, we also live in an environment where people are trying to suppress history. So how do we rectify the two? We also live in an environment where people are actively trying to restrict women's rights and their ability to control their own bodies. So how do we bridge that divide and have more equal line of thinking when there are serious threats to basic human rights?
Oh, I'm not, I hope I haven't been misunderstood. So in talking about we're really polarized and that's terrible, doesn't mean that I don't think, for example, that it is sort of unforgivably outrageous that in this country we are in fact still talking about a woman's right to do what she wants with her body. I mean, again, I'm going back to the Philip Roth and the racist novel. So I draw my mind. So I think, for example, that I'm a believer in dialogue. And I guess I've always been, maybe it's the way I was raised, I don't know. But at the same time, one draws a line, because there's some people that there's just no point talking to them. So for me, as a woman who spends half my time here and half my time in Nigeria, I'm always struck by how misogyny is alive and well in both places. In America, it's often sort of glossed over, and people say, well, it's not that bad. Women, a woman was nearly president, so it's okay. But that's not true. In Nigeria, it's much more overt. So people were saying to me, oh, but a woman cannot be governor of your state because she's a woman. How can a woman be governor? For me, both are equally terrible, but I worry that in this country, because it's glossed over and because the language around it is often, because often in this country, people don't call things what they are. So that worries me. And so there's certain people that I just won't, there's no point talking to them about, in this instance, women's rights. But at the same time, I think that it's possible to change people's minds. So, I, for example, had a few nice stories about men in Nigeria that I think, gotten to maybe start to see women as human, which is, remarkable. And I say that out loud, but really, because I think, for example, and I'm a person, people who are opposed to abortion on religious grounds or whatever, I respect that as long as it's for them, right? I really respect that. But I think that for a person to impose that on anybody, you cannot think of a woman as a full human being and believe that you can impose on her a forced birth. I just think you do not see women as human if you believe that, right? So I mean, it's kind of funny to say, oh, I got some mental, but I think fundamentally that's what it is. If you cannot think of a woman as a full human being with all of her complex, and this idea that women are not good, we should get over that, women are human, because I think that's also a problem, where we have such high expectations. I remember once a woman who was a politician in Nigeria had stolen money, which is what politicians in Nigeria do, and then she got such bad press. And someone said, well, how can a woman steal all that money? It's this idea, you're a woman, therefore, you're someone.
Oh, I have experienced it, okay? Not the women stealing money, but somehow they just seem to write about the women in politics just a little bit different.
Yeah.
They seem to talk about her just a little bit different on TV. I don't know.
I mean, if we had a vice president who was a man, would people be concerned about all the leadership style and the staff are squabbling? I mean, is she an auntie who's supposed to make sure everyone kisses and makes up, or is she a vice president?
I mean, one could argue it's not like, she's not going on very important diplomatic missions and doing real work. I don't know.
There's nothing else to talk about that, How is she housekeeping? That's really what this is. I think it's very gendered and just very unacceptable. But anyway, so thank you for your question, by the way.
We're going to take our next question from the back, and while we're getting the microphone out back there, yes, we'll bring a microphone to you. And while we're getting it back there, a really important question I want to get you on the record on. Who has the better jollof? Ghana or Nigeria? I have witnessed this ideological debate many times.
All right, if there are any Ghanaians here, you all just better sit down. All right, so
I will be having a meeting with the Ghanaian caucus after this. You all come see me. I will tell you a story.
Look, we love Ghana. Ghana is our little brother.
Yes, ma'am. My name is Cammy Butt, and I live in ghetto part of Washington, D.C. You ladies talk about January 6th are the people who came to demonstrate in the support of Trump. When you analyze the life of these people, these are very patriotic people. They are the ones who fight for America. And if you analyze their life, they are not economically better than lower and middle class African American. So do you have any empathy or something for these people that they think that this country is overtaken by people like myself and yourself, and they are looking for a cause, and they thought this was a good cause, and they came to Washington, D.C. And I mean, do you see as a human being something good in these people? Thanks.
Let me first say thank you for your question. Just adjust here. So, I think the facts are important. We talk about the facts. I think we have to talk about the facts. And the facts are that, and I want to caveat this conversation with, I was on Capitol Hill on January 6th. It was reported that the vice president was there. I was with her. We were on the Hill, and then we were evacuated, and we all luckily got to be able to, I went home, vice president went to an undisclosed secure location, and then the vice president-elect, and I watched it unfold on television. What happened on January 6th, ladies and gentlemen, to be very clear, is that people came to the Capitol in Washington, D.C. to disrupt a process that ensured the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America, fueled by something we have so eloquently, and so glibly called the big lie. Well, the big lie is the belief that President Biden and Vice President Harris are not the duly elected president and vice president of this country. The big lie says that something went down with the voting machines. The big lie says that there were actually some extra votes somewhere that nobody counted that made Donald Trump actually the next president or the re-elected president of the United States of America. And that big lie was pushed on television channels, in newspapers, on social media, in communities across the country, in little chats like Reddit, and people believed it. So they organized, and they came to the Capitol on January 6th with the sole goal to disrupt the certifying of electors, to disrupt the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America. They came to the Capitol to disrupt democracy, to stop what people all across this country went out and voted for, to invalidate their work. So the people that came to the Capitol that essentially took up arms against the government, I think we've heard this before. Those people were insurrectionists. Those people came to bring disruption. Those people are not people that believed in democracy. And what strikes me so much about that day is that largely the people at the Capitol, they went home. They went home into communities across this country. They went back to sit on school boards, and they went back to PTA meetings, and they went back to police departments, and they went back to state legislative offices. They went back to offices, and they went back to businesses. So I have no empathy for people that took up arms against the government in hopes of disrupting the peaceful transition of power because they believe they lied. That's how I feel. I don't know if you feel.
No, I can't possibly. But I want to know, because I do want to clarify your question. So, are you asking if we have empathy for what they did?
or empathy for who they are.
They are, and what are their domestic circumstances, and what is their understanding about this country that they are being exploited
Yeah.
in their own country. And if you see their credit reports, it's messed up. Some of them have depression problems, some of them have, lots of financial problems.
Yeah, I have depression too, but I'm not going to.
So I mean, you should show some empathy for those people if you do have
But I'll
depression.
tell you why. Because I think and this maybe sounds a bit religious, but we have free will. I mean, isn't that sort of this idea that you make choices? So, and when we talk, I think in this country there's an expectation that there are certain groups whose grievances have more value than the grievances of other groups. So when we talk about sort of white male angst, a certain kind of, and in this country they call it white working class. Actually, for a long time they called it the working class, as though somehow black people and brown people also don't belong to the working class. But the white working class has the angst, I think, is real, and there's a sense in which I could write a character, and I think I could make him sympathetic, because there's a sense in which you've grown up in a world where there's also an entitlement at the core of that feeling, because you've grown up in a world where you're supposed to be at the center, and suddenly you see that you're no longer kind of in the center. I think you are still, but anyway. And so that really shifts the way you feel. So I think that kind of white male working class angst is a real thing. That you're in towns that used to produce and make things, and now those towns are shuttered, and all of those things, right? So in a human sense, I understand that and feel empathy. What I do not feel empathy for, and never will, are the choices that then are made because of that. Because a lot of those people could have chosen to stay home and find democratic ways to air their views. Right? And these are the same people who, by the way, and I say this as an African, who, if this kind of thing happened in Nigeria, they would say, oh my God, uncivilized Africans. But they just did it. So it's not as if they don't know that it's not right. So it's difficult for me, especially in reading stories about people who were caught up in there, just the terror of it, right? It's difficult for me to have any empathy. I think it was a very ugly thing, and I think it was very inhumane. So,
I think we have time. We'll do one. We'll try to take maybe two. We'll take one on this side, and then we're trying to be democratic, so we'll take one from the middle. So, Simon, make it happen. I don't know.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. About saving the democracy, and trying to see what practical steps can you suggest? I mean, I'm thinking, and also talking about the cancel culture, and even the New York Times, for example, was one of these. The head of a university recently had fallen in love with one of his staff, and was forced to resign his position. That's fine, but the New York Times published a link to all of the emails between them, So, and the University of Michigan published all of those emails. This is a consensual relationship. I just thought, what has happened to the New York Times in terms of its standards of judgment? I'm a journalist by training. I grew up with an earlier sort of ideal vision about the New York Times and other papers, which has been sullied somewhat. I'm also a writer, so I understand. But I think that I'm living also in a declining democracy, and I want to know your opinion about the role of the media, both on the liberal side and the right wing, in that decline, and also whether there are some solutions besides bringing the book back somehow in a big way into people's lives that you could
that's the
perhaps-
only solution. No, I think Simone is better off answering that, the practical things, because I just waffle on. But I do want to say, I don't know the story that you mentioned, but I'm so sorry. The only thing I could think about was, the love letters they wrote were published. I want to go read them. That's terrible, right? That's really terrible. Because I'm a writer, I'm always looking for material. And just the idea of reading other people's love stories, love letters, I'm like, yes. But I really don't know. I don't know. I don't know. know what
We're
this
gonna see
is.
this. This is gonna be a
Yeah.
scene in an upcoming book. Just remember that it happened here.
It might be, but I kind of share your. So in Nigeria, the New York Times was the thing to look up to. I still think it's a good paper in many ways. I think the book section is very good. But I kind of, there are times when, again, I don't think it's a New York Times issue. I think it's an American political discourse issue where sometimes I read a piece in the New York Times, and honestly, at the end, I'm like, you still haven't told me what happened. Like, I still don't know what happened. And I sense this sort of being overly careful. Sometimes the sentences, I read them to them, I'm like, this is not even actually a good sentence. And that's because you're trying to contort yourself. It's almost as though they're written thinking about who can sue us, who can get offended, and in the end, I'm like, what the hell happened? So, and I'm not sure that it's that the New York Times is sort of evil, or I think that they're responding to a reality in America. And I don't know what the answer is. I think maybe do we need a few brave people who will sort of, stand up and I don't know. But Simone can tell us what we can do to restore democracy. Whatever she tells us to do, I will do.
I think the way to ensure democracy thrives is to participate in it. And there are various ways to participate. And you as a writer are participating in democracy every day by writing and putting your thoughts on a page. You, sir, you're trained in journalism. Journalists are a very important part of democracy, a free, fair, and open press. And in my previous life, I used to battle with the journalists all the time. I saw lots of headlines and stories I didn't like, but I respected the fact that they had the opportunity to write that and to say and to come up with a perspective, because every journalist has a perspective. They tell you they don't, they're not telling the truth. They all have a perspective, their theory of the case, and I respect the fact and relish and enjoy the fact that in the United States of America, the fourth, and we talk about the three pillars of the institutions of our democracy, well, the fourth pillar is the free press. So the best way to continue for democracy to continue to thrive is for us to participate in it. And yes, the media has a responsibility there to keep the bar high and substantive, and to tell the truth. And that's why I'm excited about the next thing that I'm doing, because I think that it is extremely important that
She's going to be on MSNBC, so everyone has to watch. I'll be watching.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, I'll
We're
totally
gonna
be
do this
watching.
again on TV.
Totally be watching. Totally.
But it's really important that people ask real questions, that they have the opportunity to hear from real people, and that they hear a bevy of perspectives. I was watching television the other day, and I saw the ambassador on, and yes, it was you. Okay, answering very hard-hitting and pressing questions from Andrea Mitchell about President Macron and France and Ukraine and what's happening with Russia and President Macron's upcoming meeting. And I smiled as I saw him on television, because I think that it is so important that every audience, but particularly people here in the United States of America, have the opportunity and the ability to hear from the French ambassador in his own words, so they're not confused about what is happening. The media is a very powerful tool to just present information to people across the world, and I love seeing you on TV the other day, and I thought it was democracy in action. Okay? So I know we are a little over time. We are going to go one more. Okay, we are going to call. Okay, maybe two more.
I'll keep them really short.
Okay, we're going to go here, and then we'll go to the woman with the camera, and then we'll go to you right there, sir, in the red burgundy nice situation. I like your shirt.
Hi, I'm very honored to be able to ask you this question. I read Americana when I just arrived in the US, and I felt so touched as an immigrant. And when I had like a full discourse, I'm gonna go to the prom, I felt a bit uneasy about a white person feeling so aligned with the experience of a black person coming to America. And my question is, do you think that's white fragility?
No, I think you're just human, and you're. So one of the things that so I feel like, again, I wish that the conversation around race in this country would maybe focus. I would like us to learn more about what happened to black people in this country instead of spending a lot of time on theories that, quite frankly, I don't know. I mean, why would you feel uneasy as a human being reading a book that you identified with the feelings of another human being? It's somehow because we've kind of created this narrative that if you're white, you cannot possibly ever understand what a black person is going through. There are many things that I think white people struggle to get, honestly. However, I do think that there's a layer of us that is human, and that's what literature does. I don't think one should feel uneasy. I read Russian books when I was growing up. I didn't know how to pronounce the names properly, but I understood what they were feeling. And I don't think that if you asked Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, whether when he was writing, he was thinking about this, girl in small town university in Nigeria, whether she would get him. I'm sure he probably thought, monkeys in Africa can read, maybe. I mean, I shouldn't ascribe racist because I don't know share any evidence of that, but I don't think Russia at the time of Tolstoy was necessarily a very black-friendly place. Actually, it's not a black-friendly place today. But anyway,
another speech, another conversation.
It's true. I think it's true. But anyway, so no, I think literature is the last thing we have to connect us and to remind us, which is why I often say people should read. This is my last rant, and I did say I would keep it short, but a friend of mine who's Dutch, he once told me, shortly after Michelle Obama's memoir was published, he said to me, and because he knows that I'm a sort of, huge Michelle Obama lover, so he said to me, oh, I bought her book for all of my women friends. So I'm like, but why didn't you buy the book for your men friends? And this is a guy who's a really good guy, who's progressive. He probably would call himself feminist if you asked him. But in his mind, women read women, right? Women's stories are for women. So this memoir written by a woman, of course, women should read it. And that really bothers me. And we know from studies that women read women, while women read women and men read men. One of my things is I would love to start this campaign of men read women. I would also like to do it for race. I think more white people really should see black literature, not just as black literature, but as literature. Right? So I remember once going to because sometimes I know white people who, again, and I say this because it's not about people being bad people. These are people who are progressive, well-meaning, but they pick up a book and they'll say something like, I read James Baldwin. And it's almost like medicine, right? They took their medicine, they took their vitamins. But you should read it in the same way as one would read, The Graves of Wrath or something. I mean, so I think black literature should be literature. I mean, I think when young white parents go to a bookstore, I think it should be as important to them as it is to me to find children's books that are diverse. Because, I remember once going to a store and saying to the woman at the store, I want books for kids that don't just have, rabbits and things in them which are good, but also just have people of color. And actually, to be very honest, I said very specifically black people. Because, again, and we can unpack that. That idea of people of color is useful in many ways. In other ways, it's not, because I think it shields the particular needs of different groups. Right? I think that the racism Asians experience has a very different texture from the racism that Hispanic Americans experience, and that sometimes when we lump everyone in, it just becomes this thing where everybody who's not white has one experience, which is not true, but anyway. So my point is, and what was my point?
Your point is that you, madam, can absolutely identify with the characters in Jane Obama's book. Because at the root of this all, we are all human. I'm really my job to synthesize the things. Okay, we're going to take the last. Okay. We're going to take your question, ask them both at the same time. What is your question? And then we're going to take your
I promise
question.
I will answer in 2 sentences.
Hello. It's nice to meet you, Chimamanda, finally. Actually, I read, the first book I read was Purple Hibiscus, then I read Americana. I recommend it to a lot of South Sudanese people. I'm from South Sudan. So I get a training with Marita Golden in 2016 for memoir writing. And then I asked her, like, because she was telling me about your first book, how can I meet Chimamanda? Because I have a lot of challenges in my writing. And I remember also you were telling the story that when you apply to come to the US for the university, you have a problem with your writing. So I had the same problem still with my writing. And she was asking me, maybe you have the ability to write fiction, but if you met Chimamanda, maybe she's the right one who will advise you. So So I want to know exactly the advice that you give me, because now I'm in the US, I have all this experience and emotion surrounded by me, and I also have memories from back home and I'm political transformation. I want to know how I can transfer that to a script. Like, how do you did it at that time?
You want to write a script, or you want to write a novel?
I want to write a novel, but
Okay.
I want to know exactly what's encouraging.
Okay, I think y'all need to get each other email. I like that. She was like, I am going to ask about my writing because writer's block is here. I need to do this. First of all, round of applause for you.
Yeah, what happened?
Yes. Okay, I want you to answer her question, but I also think
Yeah, and then just an advice for younger
Yes.
people like
What I
us.
would just say is quite, I would just say you need to write it.
Because I'm a bilingual, English wasn't my first language,
Yes.
and then I have to go and study it.
Yeah, but I can understand you, which means you can write it. So you're speaking English. I mean, this idea somehow that we have to be perfect before we start something, it's not helpful.
Oh.
Just start it. And Auntie Marita, I love Marita Golden. If you were in her workshop, I think that's, you've done it. So now you need to sit down and write.
Okay.
It's going to take you 5 years, maybe, right? Find somebody who loves you and who's honest with you and who can read. And let that person read bits of what you write. And the reason I say this is honest with you, they'll tell you if it's rubbish. Loves you, they will say it in a way that protects your heart, you know, and can read. You know, for obvious reasons. But honestly, we need some stories, because I'm very, very interested in South Sudan. I was talking to somebody who's Sudanese, but so sort of, you know, the other Sudan, not yours. And I was so curious about what life is like now, because you know what, I feel disappointed. Because I felt this kind of yes to South Sudan, because it's like, yes, no. And then, you know, all of this infighting, and I've read a bit, and it's just, so I'm really curious about what life is like for people, like the textured lives of people. So I already have an idea for your novel. So so part of it will be set in South Sudan, and then you can then have the story of the person who comes to the US.
Because I was wondering, where did she find all this experience when she writes Americana? I asked this question for a lot of people here in the US. They said she's Nigerian. So she's good in experiencing everything. So I think all of us Africans, we are good also in experiencing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Right over here, young sir. And we are giving you the last question, so I'm gonna just say it better be good. Last question, don't let us know.
No pressure, no pressure.
Okay, so first of all, thank you again for this conversation. It was really brilliant, really engaging. So earlier you mentioned CRT, which is critical race theory. If you guys don't know what that is, I hope you look it up after you go home because it's really important. And this also relates to the fact that you talked about earlier about truth-telling, the fact that history doesn't seem to be told in the way that it should be. So knowing the fact that history is not only about the facts that occurred, but the way that these archives are interpreted in the first place, and because a lot of the histories of people of color and Black people in this nation simply were not documented, what do you think is your role as a storyteller in creating these kind of truths that we talk about now, and how people maybe down the line will view the current moment that we see and see your book potentially as an archive to talk about the society that we live in today?
Such a great clap, please clap. Okay, you did not let us down. Miss Chimamanda, tell us. This is a great question to end on. Tell us.
I don't know. I think that's a good answer to end on. No. You know what? But by the way, so I want to, yes, when you say that critical race theory is important, I suppose it is. Personally, I'm not a keen fan of theory in general, and I don't know, I'm sure the academics here, and you do wonderful work, and Is that what valid, that young people use as social media, you are valid? But I'll tell you why, when it comes to history in particular, and also to women's studies, I'm not a keen fan of theory. I'm much more interested, and again, of course, I'm biased. I come with my biases. I'm a writer, I'm a storyteller, I'm interested in story, I'm interested in narrative. I think that history serves us better when we have a more narrative focus. So yes, of course, the interpretation matters, but again, back to that line from the Lowell poem, why not just say what happened? I think maybe it's a good thing to start with a narrative approach, especially when people are younger. And increasingly, I think that literature can play a role. So I would love to see. I also think that African American stories, there's been a bit of an improvement, but in general, it's not norm. It's still almost niche in this country in a way that it shouldn't be. So I guess my view is we just need to tell the stories of what happened. And I also think it would be, because people don't read, and it's terrible, but just they don't. And so maybe we need to have more, I don't know, mini-series. So I'm watching, actually the ambassador might be interested in this. Do you know, there's a series on Amazon Prime that's called The French Village. I think it's fantastic. So it's about, it's set during the Second World War in a small French village. And I'm watching it because I'm really interested in that period. But also I'm thinking, this is the kind of thing that should be done for African American history. And I don't mean slave narratives. I mean kind of a mini-series from maybe Isabel Wilkerson's book about the Great Migration. And so for the people who will not read that magnificent book, and everybody really should, but then they can watch it, and you watch it and you come away having a sense of what it is like to have been a black person in this country, and in a way that is textured, so that when somebody on TV on Fox News is saying, oh, they want reparations, that's crazy, actually you're saying, it's not that crazy, because I know the history. So that's kind of my, I don't know, do you teach CRT?
No, I'm an African American studies major, so.
So that's what you should do then. Tell the stories!